So this is going to be a little bit of a repeat from earlier in the year, but some things, like the teachings of Jesus, bear repeating until they become deeply incorporated into our understanding. Coincidentally, this was also one of our VBS stories for our program last week. In two of the Gospels, Matthew and Luke, we find sermons that are broad-ranging guidance on the importance of both our actions and the content of our heart. We call those sermons the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Level Place, or Plain. In both instances, Jesus finishes his teachings with this admonishment. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house. He dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. That's Luke's sharing of Jesus' parable. In Matthew, the two houses face similar storms, and it is the winds and the rains that cause the collapse of the second house, which is built on sand. As I noted, we looked at this parable back in March. You can find a link to it in the description down below. But that particular video was looking at the recounting in Matthew. What Matthew doesn't record is the digging down to the rock part. Now, the builder in Matthew builds on the rock, and the rock is the teachings of Jesus. But in this story, the builder digs down to the rock. I think this image is one we often miss. While Jesus' teaching is plain and clear, sometimes a lot of accumulation is built up around it when we first discover it. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' teaching lays bare the foundation of the law, shoveling away the accumulation of generations of poor interpretation, misapplication, and even a hefty load of an intentionally abusive reimagining on the part of so many former teachers. For so many people at the time of Jesus, the burden of the law was not just in keeping the commandments, but also keeping all of the many interpretations of the commandments, the ritual customs of the Jewish people, the particular methodology of the Pharisees, and so much more. It was the law and. In his teaching, Jesus clears away the sand, the accumulation that has built up on the foundation stones, and tells us to build anchored to it, and not to the teaching of mankind. But there's a tendency in our heart to accumulate. We're great collectors of tradition and baggage. And just as we can see that so many people in Jesus' time were living lives committed to the law, and we do the same thing with Jesus' own teachings. I know what Jesus said, but in my particular faith tradition, they tell me I must do this thing or that thing. I know that Jesus taught I should love my neighbor, but my preacher, minister, or teacher tells me that I don't have to love this particular person or people group. I know that Jesus taught that I should be a peacemaker, but my political party has told me to wage war with my political opponents. I know that Jesus tells me to give what I have for the poor and trust in him and not the riches of this world, but my financial advisor tells me that if I took the charitable contributions and put them in a high-yield account, I'll be secure in my retirement, and then I'll really be able to do some good. Accumulation, cruft, mounds of sand covering the true foundation. If we anchor our hearts to the sand, we will ultimately lose everything. Or as Jesus says in Matthew, what good is it if a person should gain the whole world but forfeit their soul? Let's dig deep into the scriptures and see the message of where we must place our trust. Let's ensure that our souls are not swept away with the shifting tides of nations, parties, or even religious traditions, but that our hearts are firmly anchored to the stone, the rock of truth, the author and perfecter of our faith. Everything else may drift away, but in every moment of our lives, he will remain steadfast and true. I love you. And that foundation is my prayer for you today.